Hey, can I get you to turn to the book of Matthew, actually, this morning? Book of Matthew. And actually, chapter 22. Hope your new year is kicked off well. May everybody find their New Year's hopes coming true. I finished up last week a little bit of the consequential, and this is this morning just something that's probably a good first couple weeks into the new year thoughts. It starts with Matthew 22, and in verse 34. But when the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Probably focus on verse 37 and 38 this morning. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. How many of you read that before? Yeah, it's hard to miss in the book of Matthew, isn't it? I'll tell you a little bit here about me, just as a segue into the passage here, a lesson that I learned 10, 12, 13 years ago, very hard lesson that I learned. I don't know if you've noticed this about me. I think we've been here 7 months now. If I haven't made a few things clear about me, let me start off by saying this, that everybody should know about me. I'm a big Husker fan. I don't know if I've communicated that, but it is true. And that puts me in a very front of the line for antidepressants at this point in time. I'm a fly fishing kind of freak. I like to fly fish. I don't know if I made that clear or not, but it is true, and it is something that I love to do. Learned that from my dad many, many moons ago. I love bird hunting, and I love my bird dog, Fritz. And Cheryl loves him, I'm certain, more than she loves me anymore, to be honest with you. I spent 25 years in Bozeman pastoring Fellowship Baptist Church and was a part of it for 34 years. It was the first church that really I ever joined. And I really loved that church. I loved the people. You should know that I enjoy my family. When my kids come, that's one of the greatest times that we have. I mean, I enjoy my kids, and I enjoy my wife, and I guess I enjoy my granddaughter. I mean, there's not much to her at the moment. I mean, she walks now. She makes odd sounds. She's at that stage where she sounds like a Klingon every time she opens her mouth. Just pointing at things and drooling a lot. So I do enjoy my family, and in particular, you've met, I think, some of them. Madison was here. Bailey and Hayden were here at Christmas, and that sort of thing. I enjoy them very, very, very much. So those are the essentials about me. I'm a pretty simple guy. I love the Cornhuskers. I love fly fishing and hunting. I love my family, and honestly, I love serving the Lord. I love at the time that I learned this lesson, right, that I'm speaking of. I pastored at Fellowship, and I loved my church very much. And I mentioned parts of this, I think, over the course of the 7 months that we've been here. But I'll give you the whole story of what happened about 12 years. See, I'm so old that things happened 20 years ago that I think were 12 years ago. But I think this was 2007 or 8. And I've mentioned this before, but just bear with me just for a second. Because at that time, 10 or 12 years ago, I was tested on a love, honestly. I could say I could love my family, my wife, my kids, church. But I was tested on a love, honestly, that should have been second nature. And it's a love everyone, I think, every believer, even non-Christians will say that they have this, I suppose. A love that most everyone says they have, but really rarely knows the reality of it until things sort of fall apart. And that's when you know the reality of it. The first sort of time that I was tested and confronted with this is quite a while ago now. But when what happened to me was over, it had basically hardened my heart to almost everything. It hardened my heart to ministry, certainly to people. People were a victim in that, and finally, even a little. And you know, one of the horrible things about preaching sometimes is you make it confessions, right? And confessions that you're not proud of, but it hardened my heart to God. Let me run through just a little bit of what happened. Like I said, what was happening was things that had been going very well in church began to slide downhill. I mean, the downside of ministry, and most people who've been in churches have experienced sort of some of this stuff. It's hard to avoid. The downside of ministry started washing over the shore of my work, if you will, my life's work that I'd spent my time and invested my life in. People in church started leaving. There were doctrinal disputes that Calvinism had reared its ugly head. I mean, hyper-Calvinism. There were doctrinal disputes and people were taking side. More people left because they became Calvinists, hyper-Calvinists, I should say. And some left because the hyper-Calvinists they thought weren't treated well or whatever. And there were people unhappy with music. We had hired a new music pastor from the same school that Lucas graduated from. And he was now the leader, and people were just terribly unhappy, or at least a couple people were terribly unhappy with it. And still more people either left or began to be less happy because things started being less happy. In short, many of the things that I had worked very hard to accomplish were being dismantled right before my eyes. And I suppose in some form or fashion, that's happened to almost everyone over the age of 30, and maybe not in as grandiose a fashion, but it happens. Some of the nature of life is things get taken from us. I think I talked about that some time ago. Things get taken from us over the course of time. And I've met a few people in life, and maybe you're one of them, I don't know, who think that reverend types are always serene. We always have everything under control, got our red phone to God pretty handy, right? And nothing ever seems to affect us. We have no pride, we have no ego, and we certainly don't have ambition. Well, a lot of people think that. They rarely think that pastors or people in the ministry would care or even characterize what we do with terms like success or even battle. But most of us do. Most of us, just like most of you do. In fact, I imagine most all of us here go to work and spend the lion's share of our life carving out a living while desperately hoping at the same time that we are leaving a legacy. Right? I mean, that's what we do. We want to count. We want to matter. We want to leave something behind no matter what we do. And when things are going well, none of that's a problem. But we also know that as we do this, right? I mean, most of people, right, at the beginning of life and family, right? And people toward the end, we know that there are people in this life who are counting on us. I mean, who hasn't wondered sometimes if they could keep a roof over their kid's head or feed all the mouths that sort of wandered into that room? Who hasn't worried about losing a job, no matter what the job is? Who hasn't been concerned about where the next little bit is coming from, right? We know that people are watching us, how we respond to things, how we demonstrate our love. Kids, bosses, colleagues even watch us, right? There are people who are measuring us. All the time we're working, when we're carving out a living, hoping to leave a legacy, people are measuring us. Competition measures us, bosses measure us, society measures us, neighbors measure us, even friends. Where are we? How have we grown? What have we done with what we've been given? And again, when things are going well, none of that's a problem. Everyone is taken care of, and we are respected and esteemed and generally masters of our own universe, where everything's fine when things are going well. And I was no different. 2007, 2008, what happened to me wasn't jaw-dropping. It isn't even unusual. It wasn't a Greek tragedy. What happened was pretty ordinary. Pretty ordinary. I woke up one day and things had changed. It seemed to me that people in church started getting restless, a little more easily agitated, a little more wondering, what the future would hold. Some left, and then after a while, more left, and even more till we eventually lost about 40% of the congregation that had departed. And then, when it couldn't get worse, everything got worse. You ever been there? When things you thought couldn't get worse, oh my goodness, then they got worse. How in the world? How does it get worse like that? And again, that's because of the economy. Remember that economy thing back in 2007, 2008? Remember that thing? That was a pretty rough thing. I woke up one day, and again, the economy had plunged our most faithful people. We had a lot of contractors in church. It had plunged our most faithful people into a survival situation, literally, financially speaking. People I had known for 20 years and who had worked very hard at their careers and their jobs and their companies were basically weeping at our kitchen table because they were all going to lose everything that they had worked for. People I'd known for more than 20 years. And of course, that was right on time. The whole collapse of the worldwide economy was right on time because our church had recently begun a building project. So that's always wonderful too. You have plans to build buildings, and then you've purchased property, and then the economy goes into the tank and takes the most faithful people in your church with it for years to come. That's just not what you're hoping for when you turn over a shovel of dirt and hope to build, and of course the project was delayed just long enough by the city for that worst recession in decades to really do a number on all of our plan. And then after that, things sort of, it's hard to describe how it happened, but then, at the beginning of the year, more families left, and friends of mine in church had left. People who'd played key roles in church and had been active, and one day, it seemed out of a clear blue sky, they just left. I can't remember, honestly, a more difficult 18 months of struggle in any church for me. Now, that's not a sob story. I'm not saying that for a sob story. But let me just tell you how much worse it got. Because at that same time, my oldest daughter graduated from high school and left for Chicago to attend Moody Bible Institute. Anybody been to Moody Bible Institute? Straight downtown Chicago. We stayed in a hotel about a block away from Moody Bible Institute, right? And as part of check-in time, they gave us earplugs for the sirens that were going 24 hours a day. And I'm leaving my little girl in the midst of Chicago. And the first news story, not joking, the first news story after we got up the next morning after checking her out was the number of murders in Chicago. And I'm leaving my oldest girl there. My middle child is still there right now. And every day you wonder, you want to call her and say, stay home. Online learning is the way to go, right? It's just, don't go out your door. So anyway, I don't know if you were like me when my first kid graduated, I was a wreck. I was a mess. I don't know why. I just was. I commiserated with friends of mine via text about our kids graduating and hating the idea of seeing them go and where they were going and all that sort of stuff. So we do that. We go and drop her off at Moody. It's very difficult. I think somebody gave us comedy CDs to listen to. They gave us like Christian comedians to listen to on the way home so that I wouldn't be tempted to drive the Suburban off a bridge, being so depressed. And then we got home and went to bed that night, and this is no joke, went to bed that night, Saturday night. Church the next day. We had been meeting in a gym. It was August. We'd been meeting in a gym while we were hoping to build, and woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning with a phone call that said the gym was on fire. And we had left all of our stuff in the gym because it was summer and school wasn't meeting. And so all the guitars, all the keyboards, all the chairs, everything in the gym. And I went to the gym, and it was in fact on fire. And it was on fire for a very long time. And not only did it burn everything, but we needed a place to meet as a church. First Sunday after that, we met in my front yard. And that was middle of August, and we met in yards until, no joke, the 1st of October. Because every vacant spot, every empty square foot in Bozeman was taken up by somebody starting a new church. And so one that had been there almost 30 years couldn't find a place to live. I sat there that night as that gym burned, and I actually wrote an article about this. I sat there and looked at that gym burning, and I thought about the people who had left and the plans that were shelved, and I thought about all the redirection that had to happen, and I thought about my daughter graduating and leaving her behind in the murder capital of America and getting home and watching everything burn and not knowing where we were going to meet the next day or the week after that. And I just looked up at the sky and I just said, seriously? Seriously, Lord? Anybody ever have a moment like that? You're not trying to be rebellious, and you're not trying to ask the poison Job questions. You're just, seriously? When it all settled, there was one thing I no longer had. Might not be what you might imagine. Whether it was true or not, I felt I had lost it in the eyes of those measuring me, those watching me, and those counting on me. And it was the ones counting on me that hurt the worst. I no longer had success. Situations like this, at least for me, brought me to a place where on a good day, if you spend a day looking for places to meet for your church and dwindling congregation, on a good day, I couldn't remember why I did what I did. And on a bad day, I hated what I did. I won't put that on a resume, by the way, but and that will bring you face to face with what constitutes success in what you do. You know how most people in ministry count success? I'm sure you do know. By how many faces stare back at you on a Sunday morning. And I learned that's not the right way to count success. Then after all of that, I said that I can honestly say that I had never reckoned success by numbers, by a number of people in the pews or anything else. I have never believed that the effectiveness of a ministry could be measured by numbers until I started losing them. And I realized that that's exactly what I thought. And when our numbers started dwindling both in attendance and finances, I began to realize that I did measure my success exactly by that. And I began to wonder if I could take care of the people counting on me, like I said. Whereas with all this, the rent and all this sort of stuff, I began to fear toward the end, and this was a very difficult thing. I began to fear what my kids would think of me, how successful Dad was. And what my colleagues and friends would say about me. And then I got angry. And then the cynicism, and I'm a pretty big cynic, but the cynicism that attended me my whole life turned ugly, and it turned on others. It's like people say that there are happy drunks and mean drunks. There are happy cynics and there are mean cynics. And I had turned into a mean cynic. And then I realized something. Well, Reverend Steve, what in the world is the point of all this? There's a point. Because I learned something in that moment I hadn't realized until then. And as I look back, it may even be the reason why it all happened, I guess, at least for me. I realized that I still loved the Cornhuskers. I still loved fly fishing and hunting. I actually still loved my church. I definitely loved my family. But my love for the first thing had waned. From beginning to end, the turmoil that I was experiencing exposed something in my life I probably wouldn't have noticed had it not come along. What was clarified for me is what I would call, again, the first thing. Physicians operate by the dictum when they go to treat someone, at least I'm told this, I'm not a physician, that the Socratic oath begins with first, do no harm. when it comes to Christians, when it comes to churches, when it comes to pastors or anybody else who names the name of Christ, there is a similar first pledge. And it's what we read. Verse 38, Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. What I learned is that before anything, before I could love anybody with any depth or meaning, I had to first love God. Before any of it could be valuable, I had to first love God. And you probably have read this before. There are people here are trying to trip Jesus up, and they ask him a very basic question. They've been asking him questions throughout the chapter here. And they ask him a basic question. They said this very simply, what we just read. It was actually in verse 36, which is the great commandment in the law? Which is the great commandment in the law? I'm the kind of person who kind of finds significance in the word used by people in the Bible. I think the Bible is a book of very well-chosen words, chiefly because I think words are chosen deliberately, and so this statement captured my attention when I began to think about my situation back in 2007, 2008. And there are two significant words. He says, what is the great commandment in the law? The great commandment is also, the word means first, or greatest commandment. I mean, you ever read through this and the question is answered, which is the great commandment? And we're probably still drinking our coffee in the morning and we don't realize the significance of the question. Speaking to the Son of God, these people ask him, what is the most important commandment in all of the law? And you think about it for just a second, that should pique our interest because the Bible is a big book and God has said a lot of things. And in the Old Testament alone has 613 commandments in the first 5 books by themselves. 613. If you just limit it to that, what is the biggest, greatest, first, most important commandment in all of those 613? Prioritize them for me and tell me the absolute most important. And Jesus' answer is right before us. You shall love the Lord thy God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. I don't think that probably came as a surprise to anyone who heard it. The phrase, love the Lord thy God, is found 9 times in Deuteronomy alone. And this is, again, the word great there is the Greek word proto or protos, right? And according to Christ, love the Lord thy God is the protos. And that idea of first is not first in line, not like the first one listed. It's the first in importance. It is, as is said here, the greatest, right? And Jesus says, according to Christ, loving God is the greatest commandment. And let me distinguish that from knowing about God, from experiencing God, distinguish it from holding God in high esteem, and distinguish it from even serving or obeying God. They all fall after first love God. And it's genius, because if you love God, the rest fall into place. And the word love, again, is the Greek word here. I know I don't care about the time this morning. It's the Greek word agapao, and it means to love dearly. I want you to know what Jesus just said, just to stop and think about it. Jesus, what is the greatest commandment in all of the 613 commandments of the law? It is to love the Lord your God. And that word love, when they heard this, they understood what it meant. To love dearly your God. And this is where I had to turn into introspection, right? I knew I served God, I obeyed God, right? I mean, I was the pastor of a church, I preached God's word, but that's what I had to confront. Did I actually, at this time, after all of those things, did I actually love him dearly and tenderly? Whether you know the Greek word or not doesn't really matter. I guarantee we all know what agape or agapao refers to because we've all lived it. And only the most hardened of human beings do not know it. That kind of love is the kind of love you sense when you, and I've said this before, but you turn around and you see your bride walking up the aisle with her dad. I think Cheryl floated down the aisle toward me. And she saw her groom chewing gum like a cow. But when I turned around, that music hit, I turned around, I saw her, I was mesmerized. It's the kind of love that you sense when you're standing at the hospital bedside of your daughter and you realize maybe for the first time you understand the depth of your love by the pain that you feel for her sickness. Your heart is wide open and exposed to every prick of pain that exists on the earth. It's when you see your son sleeping. You ever walk into the bedroom of your kids? This is going to be creepy for some of you kids. You ever walked into the bedroom of your kids while they're asleep and just look at them? I'd go into the bedroom of my son and I'd look at him and I just envied his dreams. Unscarred and unsullied by what the world brings to bear in people's lives. That's a dear, tender love. You hug your daughter. You ever gotten a hug from your daughter and you know that no one could hug you like that in all the world? Actually, the competition between Madison and Bailey was won by Bailey. We used to call them great big Bailey hugs. And she'd jump up into my arms and she'd throw her arms around me and she'd wrap her legs around me and squeeze me like a constrictor of some sort. And it was the best feeling in the world. You ever felt that? And you realized how that firm embrace told you that you were still a hero to someone, no matter what kind of day you had. That's a dear and a tender love. And you realize at some point along the line in life, after you have kids of your own and they've driven you crazy for how many times, I don't know, you realize the love your parents had for you because you now have it for your kids. That's a dear and a tender love. And you call your mom or your dad and you call them for no reason except to acknowledge in yourself that you now understood all the lectures begging you to call your mother on Mother's Day and rebukes of not sending your dad a Father's Day card. And you realize that you have been loved with a dear and a tender love. Whoever it was, there came that one seminal moment in life where an inescapable truth washed over your soul and you understood you loved them dearly and you loved them more than anyone or anything on this earth, and you are affected by them and their well-being and you are captivated by them, and at times you even marvel at them, and your life, think about the people who match this description. Your life is incomplete without them. You understand there is nothing better in all the world than the love that you have from those people and the love you have for those people whom you dearly love, and you know that no power, no position, no pleasure, no liberty, no freedom, no substance, no passion can ever replace the well of love in your soul should you lose them or that you sense in their presence. It's not passive love. It's not an academic love. It's not a love that we simply acknowledge and move on to other things. It is a dear, tender love, and that is how Jesus says we are to love God. Is that true? Are we affected by the love of God in our life? And is it how we view Him? No pleasure, no power can take care of it. Guaranteed. There come times, and this is like I said, the first part of a year is a good opportunity to sort of present this. There come times when life will strip away what passes for accomplishment. Just the nature of life. It will mercilessly reveal the dissatisfaction inherent with 10 notions of success. It just does that. And it will refuse to allow you to be consoled with superficial answers to trivial questions. Instead, it will demand answers to primal ones. The first of which being, do you really love God? Not the stuff, not prospects for the future, not the esteem of others, not a lifestyle, not a church, not a style. Demand that you answer the primal question, the only one that matters, the first commandment. Do you love God dearly? And I don't know when it happened. I don't think it was the night that I stood up and asked seriously, but it was probably after a day of driving around trying to find a place for a church to meet. The answer came back to me, no. Just didn't. And the real problem with this, is something in this text that hardly any of us notice. I didn't notice it. Verse 36. Master, which is the great, what's the word there? Commandment in the law. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and the greatest, what? Commandment. You know the 10 Commandments, I'll just draw on them for 2 seconds. We're commanded not to lie. If we do lie, what have we committed? We're commanded not to covet. If we indulge coveting, what have we committed? If loving God is the first and greatest commandment, loving God with a dear and tender love is the first and the greatest commandment, then to allow ourselves not to is the first and the greatest sin. The Bible is not ambivalent about believers loving God. It's designed to help us see where we are. And the thing about it is, this is why I go back to where I was. I realized that the time to establish a dear and a tender love for God is not when everything falls apart. You want to run into times where things are falling apart with that love. And that love is not dependent upon things going well or going poorly or going badly or who's sick and who's well and who's alive and who's died. It's not dependent upon any of that. A dear and a tender love is a commandment that none of us are excused from. And it happens so, this is the thing. It's not meaning to beat people with a guilt stick. It happens to everyone, I think. Things get to us. Things pile drive us into the ground. Life does that. And that's not the time to realize I need to shore up the love I have for God. It's on a day like this with a year sprawled out in front of us to know that no matter what happens and what comes, our Lord's going to take care of it. And our love for Him will not be affected by it. Father, I'm grateful this morning for your word and for such a wonderful, wonderful commandment. Lord, I pray that you will be with us as we come before you with that consideration on our mind. First, love God. Before anything else, before even obeying you, first love you. Lord, sometimes in the world it's very difficult to maintain that. We are tossed to and fro. Our attention is distracted into 1,000 different directions. And Lord, we're all prone to worry and concern. But Father, in this moment, in this time, in this place, can you just give us a respite from all of that and just allow us to consider the health of our love for you. Pray you'd be with everyone here this morning. In Christ's name, amen.